Today, it's Edwin's Monday evening property rant. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics, working on this post covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian flavour. And today I'm joined by Edwin once again to explore the nether regions of the apartment market. Hi, Edwin.
You forgot Saint Edwin.
Saint, yeah. No, my sainted Edwin, yeah, exactly. No, it's very interesting because I had a few people react to that comment last week, but they all actually supported the idea. So if you're not careful, you'll end up a saint down the track.
Well, I'm wearing my saintly outfit, Martin. This is the closest thing I could come to those religious collars. What?
Yeah, very good. And I'll tell you one of the things that really came up several times this last week. I've been running my one-on-one conversations. This idea of relying on the vendor's survey. Right? I had several people looking at apartments and several people saying, well, the vendor's surveys reads very well. You know, why would I look at anything else? And you haven't been listening to what St. Edwin has been saying.
Particularly with apartments, Martin, a lot of people forget the fact that conveyancers or solicitors are paid typically on average between $1,500 and $2,000 to do a conveyance. And when you get some strata reports that are actually 200, 300 pages long, I like to ask the question, how many solicitors and how many conveyancers are going to be reading through all that paperwork to get to the duck's guts of what's really going on in the building? Because a lot of the issues that are identified could have been identified 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 years ago, similar to the case of Mascot Towers. I was saying all along, and I've been saying for almost a decade, that you have to look at the strata reports from the original strata manager and what happened, what was the discussions with the builders, what were the discussions with the developers at the time, and that strata report, I believe, points out that there was a bit of shenanigans going on at the beginning, and there was a deal done for the builder not to go back in there and do the major rectification works, because they came to an agreement on a numeric agreement or a dollar amount at that time, and from memory, my memory's failing me, Martin. It goes in neutral from time to time, but it was around $700,000 or $800,000. And look at it now; they're looking at demolishing the whole building.
That's right. Yeah, and people are looking at an 80% drop or something. You know, if they get anything back, it really is shocking.
Yeah. In those reports, Martin, as I said, typically what the conveyancer or the solicitors will look at is just the annual financials. I'd be very surprised if they even read past the last 3 yearly reports. So they really look at what's happening in the last financial year, where the status of the sinking fund is at, and if there are any special levies that have any money is being raised for special levies. So all I'm getting at is solicitors and conveyancers are not really going to do those searches, and there are specialty companies that focus on looking at strata reports for the purchaser and in detail, and look, they're worth every single penny.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because I was making a point the other day to a couple of my viewers that when you think about the report, particularly if you're buying apartments, there is a bunch of structural questions, like, well, are things right? Things like asbestos if it's an older property, things like whether it's got any other structural defects. But you then also got to look at this whole strata structure as well. So there's an economic conversation to be had, and that's the one that people, I think, miss out on quite often.
Well, that's right. They don't look at the common areas. They just look at the actual unit itself. Or let's go a little bit further. Let's look at some townhouses. Now, clients of mine last year, we were looking at a townhouse complex in Borkham Hills, and it was really nice. The townhouse that they were interested in was very well presented, and it showed very little defects or issues by way of defects. to itself. But as I travelled further down the complex, I was able to see that the townhouses to the rear of the complex, they had major structural issues, and I could see that there was a lot of water ingress issues as well. So there was a lot of work, and when you quiz the selling agents, they don't know any better, and obviously they take a caveat and they tell you, caveat emptor, buyer beware, and and that's as far as they go. Whether they do know, or whether they don't know, you've just got to be persistent, and just got to be persistent doing your own research and checking out, and not just checking the unit itself that you're interested in, but the entire complex. I mean, you in the high rise, I go all the way down to the bottom basement level and walk around, and I'll literally walk up each level, checking to see what's happening at each level, not just where the garage or the space is for that particular unit. I will go all the way to the bottom and make my way up, and then also walk through the common areas as much as possible. So there's a lot. There's a lot. Quite frankly, I think there's a lot more to building reports in strata complexes than there is to in freestanding homes.
Yeah, and I'd make the point, Edwin, that often the report from the vendor will be silent on things, right? So you can't assume that it's comprehensive, right? And errors of omission are always hard to prove afterwards.
Well, that's right. And the other thing, Martin, is that our viewers need to also know it's rather interesting, is the fact that not a lot of people do building reports for when they go and buy strata units. I mean, they go as far as doing building and pest reports for the townhouses or villas, but not necessarily for apartments, let alone the high rise. And it's fascinating to see how many properties get transacted without doing an independent building report. They just literally rely on the strata report, which I think, look, you just don't know who the strata manager is. You may have a good strata manager currently, but who were the previous strata managers? What did they do? What didn't do? More to the point, and hence the reason after they watered down the strata bylaws and the regulations around 2015, and they brought up this the stupidity of holding 2% by way of penalties on for future issues that by way of a levy to take care of future issues that the high-rise developments were going to be faced with, was just ludicrous. It really made more sense to order building reports. But you'd be surprised, Martin. I would say, easy 9 out of 10 strata complex purchases do not go as far as getting a building report.
No, well, I agree. And again, I think that particularly if it's an older style property, it's really essential. But even a more modern one, right? We should highlight the flammable cladding issue, right? We know that there are lots and lots of buildings out there where flammable cladding still exists, hasn't necessarily been made very public. Some strata organizations are trying to deal with it on the quiet. It's a real mess. And, my own view is that it's probably thousands of properties around the country that actually have flammable cladding. Interesting, in the UK, they've actually brought in further legislation now, particularly for high rise. You can actually get government money if you're over so many stories, but if you're lower than so many stories, then you have to just get a free low interest loan to try and cover the cost of fixing it. So my point is, some of this flammable cladding is down to the owners of the property, or indeed the people living in the property, and that's something else that people should think about.
Well, that's right. There's 215 or so apartment complexes or buildings that are being identified according to Fair Trading New South Wales, and anywhere between 200 and 215. That's still yet to be rectified, and it's a huge cost. To be able to rectify it, and how do you do it? So basically, and with all the going backwards and forwards with the legal issues that people have confronted with that. It's left to the owners' corporations, which in turn are going to be relying on the governments. And this is just in Sydney. Then you've got the outskirts of Sydney. You've got Gosford, then you've got Newcastle, and even Wollongong. For that matter, it's all the commercial hubs and along the east coast. So it's a big mess that hasn't been addressed properly. I don't think it's going to be addressed properly. And at the end of the day, the question remains: is the taxpayer going to have to cut the checks to get these things rectified? Sooner than later, they've got to make a hard decision. You either are going to allow people to live in these death traps, or not. They've either got to be condemned or rectified, one or the other, because it's just a ticking time bomb. And I'd say that in a lot of the cases, the fuse was lit years ago, and the wick's only getting smaller by the week, by the month.
Yeah, that's right. And interestingly, again, in the UK, some of those high-rise buildings where there's flammable cladding on the outside, they now have people 24/7 in the public spaces patrolling each floor of the property, right? Because people are so nervous and concerned about the risks of fires breaking out. And of course, there was that horrible incident in London some time ago, which really drew attention to this whole issue. But I'd also make the point that even lower rise and even, maybe some houses potentially also have flammable cladding on the outside too. And no one is worrying about that.
No, and let me tell you, there's a hospital north of Sydney that's also they've done the rectification work on the Quiet that was full of cladding. There's a lot of public buildings that they've got flammable cladding, as well as the other components that are, quite frankly, should not have been allowed to be imported into the country. And you and I have spoken about with some of the research that your wife is doing with regards to some of these materials, where in countries such as Asia, having up to 10% of asbestos in gyprock sheeting is okay. That it passes their standard, but it's no way it passes our standards. But how many thousands of individual apartments have been lined with this gyprock sheeting that contains asbestos, and how many people are drilling in holes into these walls? How many people are nailing picture rails onto these walls and so forth, and or do attending to repair work and sending these walls to get painted and so forth. I mean, the list goes on. Then you've got the mold issues that because of the bad cross-flow ventilation, or because a lot of these high rises and these dog boxes are relying on mechanical ventilation, which generally fails because as they're building the damn things, a lot of crap falls onto the duct that's placed in between floors, and it crushes the duct, and the cross-flow ventilation that doesn't work as effectively. I mean, I've seen photos of mold-ridden apartments. I've had videos I've shared videos online of where I've had teams of specialists come into newly built apartments and use a UV light to show the extent of how the mold has travelled from one room all the way around the apartment into the cold areas, the wet areas, as well as in one particular case where the baby's room or the children's room was full of spores and mold that you couldn't see it with the naked eye, but with this special lighting equipment that they had, it was all over the toys, and the babies were typically chewing on the toys and playing with them day in, day out.
Absolutely. It's quite shocking. And, the point I'd make, Edwin, is you don't need a vast amount of mold spores to create health problems. And by the way, for asbestos, you only need one fibre. One fibre is sufficient ultimately to create medical issues that often leads to premature death. These are really serious issues, and again, are not adequately being addressed, both in the building standards and in terms of inspections. So more reasons to get, up-to-date information if you're thinking of buying anyway.
Well, that's right, and that's as we're doing the deep dive into apartments. People just don't realise how many different issues that they have. Look, this is outside of the pricing and where it's going. This is outside of the rental returns and where that's going. It's going backwards at a million miles an hour, and also the price and the vacancies that are about to come up. I mean, that's outside of that. There's the construction issues, the settlement issues with respect to construction and how they were built, and all the shortcuts that were taken along the way. I mean, it's been well hidden, and I think when a lot of this was being exposed in 1819, then the saviour was was the pandemic, because everybody stopped talking about the issues with apartments, the high-rise developments and so forth, and everybody started focusing on the pandemic. It was their saviour, but now we're getting back into the general conversation about prices, housing prices, and where it becomes like a two-speed pricing structure with regards to apartments and freestanding homes or dwellings of the like, and how that's going, where the ABC brought out a story, put him in touch with Catherine Cashmore. Catherine Cashmore had a lot to say about what's happening in Melbourne in that story that was brought out by the ABC, but the mainstream are starting to pick it up, and once again, and there's an avalanche of vacancies that are going to come up. And as I've been saying all along, I know of one agency in Sydney that's holding on to 2,400 apartments for sale, and the fortunate thing for a lot of the apartment investors has been that a lot of developers, builders, and real estate agencies that work with very closely with the builders and developers with high rise have been able to drip feed the for sales into the market and able to control it somewhat. But we're coming to a point now, to the pointy end, where they can't hold it any longer. They've got to let them go now that the eviction moratorium has been lifted, and as I said in the previous podcast, where the the NCAT is inundated, is backlogged with eviction hearings that are being heard day in, day out, and sooner than later we're going to really see what's going to happen with apartments.
No, I think it's just worth reflecting on a bit further on the pricing of apartments, because the old spin of everything's fine in the property market and everything's booming. No. It may be true for some standalone houses in some areas, but the apartment market is littered with falling prices, higher vacancies, typical rental returns in some cases down 30% from where they were previously, and still not getting people to come and live in the apartments. And it's interesting because it's quite patchy again, but there are areas, for example, in around the centres of cities where, of course, you don't have students anymore because of the lockdowns, where you don't have a lot of people who would have previously wanted to live close in. And then if you go slightly further out into the sort of the inner suburban areas, where there have been masses and masses of buildings of apartments over quite some time, huge vacancies there. And as I keep saying, Edwin, and you think I've underscored too, if you're one of 20 people trying to sell in a high rise, you've got no differentiation at all. The only thing you can move is on price, and that's down.
Yeah, on price, or and obviously the level determines the price, and the view determines the price as well. So, but again, it's when you start considering what's actually happening, and all the trends of these people that are moving out of apartments, and again because of the eviction moratorium that has been lifted, and now it comes, it's D-Day, it's. They have to face the arrears and so forth, and now they're moving back home. So there's other trends that have evolved. There being where removalists are storing furniture for people in order to because you've got 2 or 3 families now occupying bigger homes, and that's a trend that we've been talking about for a few months now as well, Martin. Particularly with the ethnic communities and Asian communities in particular. So it's interesting. So this apartment fiasco, this apartment downturn, it's going to not only bite, as we've seen the reports in with regard to Melbourne, reports of 30 to 40% price drops. It's pretty much, it's coming to a city near you, and Sydney's very much on the cards. With those sort of halls. I mean, I know I have friends that are trying to sell apartments now, and albeit they're not newly the new high-rise ones, but they are apartments that were built 20 years ago. They still have lifts in the complexes. They've still got some issues, but at least they're not the newer high-rise. They're bigger floor spaces, but they're having to drop 15, 17% from what they would have asked for late last year in order just to get on market and have some people look at it, because nobody's attending to them.
No, absolutely. And interestingly, Edwin, if you look at all of the chat around this, right, there's something else that's worth noticing, and that is that the high-rise construction sector is wanting more government support to build yet more stuff. And we also know that some office accommodation in the centre of town is now being effectively recrafted as yet more apartments close into the city centre. So the supply is going through the roof. Demand is still very weak. And as you say, we also have the story of people moving out of apartments, going to live with families or friends or whatever, for all sorts of reasons. In fact, I've got some research coming out quite soon on that, which I'll go into a lot more detail. But it's fascinating just watching how many people are just jumping out. And that, of course, is putting downward pressure on apartment prices. And I see no end to that.
No, and the other interesting thing also is the build to rent. There's been a lot of chatter on with respect to build to rent, and a lot of people perhaps don't understand how that works. Where it's basically institutions or money that developers do joint ventures with big funding institutions, and these apartments are built. So they basically, you've got corporations, organisations, and developers competing directly with individual apartment investors. Now, obviously, they're not looking at individual apartments that are vacant in a complex. They look at the overall rental return for all the occupancy. So if it's 50% occupied, they're still getting an income at the end of the day, because they're using super funds and whatever other managed funds that the developer's been gifted or granted to use to develop these, or however the arrangement is. So they're still getting a return. It's spread out over all the entire building, whereas when you've got buildings that have 95, 98, 100% individual owners, well, it's in direct competition with them. So it's more pain, less gain for individual apartment investors, and we're also getting a lot of chatter of from the WeChat chatterers of what's happening in China. There's a huge uptick of unemployment from the ages of 30 to 45. So basically, they work what they call a 996 time slot, which is you start at 9 in the morning, you finish 9 at night, and you work 6 days a week. Now, if you can't do those hours because of family commitments or any other commitment, well, you've no longer got a job, because you've got 5, 10 other people ready to replace you anyway. So, and that's, all these pressures. So all these people all these investors that have been sitting on these assets here, they're going to start to let them go, and they're going to start, and we're going to start to see big drops, more evident over the next 3 to 6 months. But as now we know that the dust is being allowed to settle in some of these avenues.
Yeah, well, the old saying about bargain basements. And talking of bargain basements, you got some photos. Sometimes
I worry when I go down to these basements, Martin, because I sort of wonder whether I'm going to be able to am I going to crawl back up? I'm going to walk back up? I'm going to be running back up? Because there's some scary stuff going on down in some of these basements, and the ones that I've sent you is really just the tip of the iceberg on some of the developments that I visited in previous years, and some of the ones that our viewers have sent to us to share on our podcast.
It's pretty horrendous. I mean, if you just sort of, walk through, and we'll show them as we speak, there are examples of severe cracks, lots of uneven surfaces, examples also of flooding, right? Stuff that you wouldn't want to see in a basement close to where you were wanting to live.
No, definitely, and again, the some of the stuff that you see in the basements, when you start seeing the acroprops, not the ones that that you see on every day of the week, but the massive double the double putting acroprops or triple. It's these things. When you start seeing them spaced out over the basement car park to hold up 40, 50 stories, it's just again, it's scary stuff. I really have to think twice when I go down into these basements, because it's as far as it's any time. When is it all going to happen?
Yeah, well, you wonder what monsters lurk there, literally, right? And it's worth saying, Edwin, that
concrete termites are getting bigger by the year, mate.
Exactly. Horror film coming your way. And it's worth saying some of these are not that old either, are they?
No, they're not. A lot of the ones that. Look, I've taken footage of apartments and developments over the years when they were, 12 months from completion to 3 years from completion. Some of the ones that our viewers are seeing that you're sharing, that they're probably around 5 or 7 years, being built 5 or 7 years ago, or 3 years ago. But as I said, these you start seeing a lot of these issues in buildings pretty much within the first 2 to 3 years. As the building settles, and that's when you start really, it starts taking on the pressure starts really coming on in the footings and the all the basement areas, and that's where it all happens. And then it just sort of, if you can see it, the big question is, Martin, if you can see it, you got to ask yourself what's happening in the areas that you can't see. Yeah. That's a bigger question.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And, folks, if you're thinking of buying a high-rise apartment, don't just walk around the apartment. Go lurk in the basement, right? Go down to the bottom and see what things are like, because you'll learn a lot more down there than you will in the apartment, where they may have some nice finishes and some stone sitting in the kitchen. That's all a misdirection, right? You've got to go where the action is, down in the basement.
Look, exactly, and also if you can find out who the builder was, then go and have a look at other buildings. Check other buildings that they've built. Look to see whether they've stood the test of time, because that's very critical as well. Knowing how strong the builder is, how strong not so much the developer but the builder, because the developer just barks orders in most cases. It's the builder that the building standards, the builder that really. You really got to see, where they built, how they built, and what type of reputation, and obviously, are they still around? Which is one of the most important, things that you've got to check. Are they still around? Because all these questions arise.
The longevity is really critical, I think, because quite often you'll hear a building firm appear, build something, and then disappear, and then of course you've got no recourse if they disappear without any visible means of support. So I guess, Edwin, my question is, if you were considering buying into a high rise? Well, would you consider buying a recent high rise, or would you say it's all too hard? Structural issues, flammable cladding, all the other stuff we've been talking about. Would you avoid it like the plague, or do you think there is still potential value in some areas of high rise if you know where to look?
Look, one of our clients asked us to look into apartments in the inner west, and as I say to all our clients and all our viewers, mate, whenever you buy with an upside, because you make money when you buy, not when you sell, is the principle that we have adopted. And at the moment, the main upside, as far as I'm concerned, is the price point. So if I can get something that's 40 to 50% the value of what somebody paid 2 or 3 years ago, well, I'll consider it. Providing that it passes all the other tests as well, with regard to how it was built, with regard to the structural integrity, with regard to making sure that you read the strata report from day one, not just the last couple of years. The summary of the last couple of years, but you read the entire report, and you do all those checks and balances. So, because at the end of the day, there are some good buildings. There are some buildings that have been built by first tier developers, and not necessarily first tier building companies, but very good builders and developers that unfortunately get caught up in all this backwash of crap that's out there because of the regulations just being so poor. And the reason why they're falling behind is not necessarily because of the issues of the building, but because the ownership is falling behind in a lot of the strata levies and all the other special levies, and the sinking funds aren't up to speed, and there's a huge vacancy. So, but I would still look for the opportunities. Just, I guess, knowing what I know, what's been, what the chatter is with regards to the vacancies that are about hit the apartment industry, and also the knowing that one of my mates' companies is holding on to 2,400 apartments on their own for sale in Sydney.
Tells you something.
I wouldn't look at it any other way.
And I'd add just a couple of things, Edwin. If you look at it from a financial perspective, right, I guess it's different if you're buying for an occupation, because then ultimately it's about buying it at the right point. If you look at it as a property investment, then you've got to take account of what rents can I generate, right? And the other point I'd want to make is that, in fact, in many parts of the rental market, rents are still dropping, and they're dropping very fast. And if you look at the net yield, which is the only way to look at this in my view, gross yield, which is a sort of a ratio of price to theoretical rental return, is meaningless, right? And that's the one that all of the portals spruik. The truth is you need to look at net rental yield, which is what are the costs, what are the funding costs, what are the strata costs, all the other bits and bobs you have to look at to be able to actually work out whether you can get sufficient coming in. And then there are two things about the rent. The first is, what is the rent? And the second is occupancy rate, right? What's the assumption you're going to make with regard to occupancy rates? Because it's interesting that APRA is suggesting, of course, that banks should be assuming an 80% occupancy rather than 100% occupancy when they actually assess a loan. Bet people didn't know that. And of course, in some parts of Sydney, I've been talking to people, same in Melbourne as well, where they've had nobody in the building for the last 6 months, so no rent at all. That's the reality that property investors are facing, which is no wonder why some of them are now looking to bail into the maybe slightly more positive news more broadly in the property sector, right? You've got to do the numbers. You've really got to go into a lot of detail. You can't take the high-level gross yield as the guideline for it being a great investment.
Well, we often chase the actual the documents that would have the owner's details for the entire complex, and that's obviously we pay for that, obviously, and we get that to give us a general overview as well as to who owns them, and you start getting a general idea. as to whether or not they're local investors or foreign investors. And as I said, this is where a lot of the chatter now that is happening amongst the WeChat chatterers has been. Again, we shared a few weeks back, and with regard to the special levies that have been raised, because a lot of foreign investors haven't stumped up for their levies or the sinking fund, and those funds have got to comply with regulations. There's regulations that govern the way these buildings are managed, and the way that the strata companies manage these buildings. Hence the reason why they're owners corporations. And this is what I said before is it wouldn't surprise me to know that a lot of these owners corporations are basically trading insolvent because they're having to raise special levies, but you've got to keep lifts, you've got to keep the common areas, you've got to keep the safety regulations and audits and fire regulations and audits and everything else. So it's not cheap to manage an entire block, and the bigger the block, the more obviously it's going to cost all around. So these owners that are now offloading their apartments, it's because the rents have dropped from $550 a week in some cases to $380 a week, but what's really tipped them over the line has been the fact that other owners in the complex haven't been paying haven't made contributions to the sinking fund, let alone paying the strata. So now that again that that they can be sued and can be literally taken to court and then being bankrupted, they can now effectively take action and bring about legal remedies to collect this money that are out. And the only way that you're going to get this money is by getting court orders to have these complexes, these apartments sold in order to recover what they owe the owners corporations. There's no other way, particularly when they're overseas, Martin.
Absolutely, yeah, that's very important. Again, going into detail is the only way. And my final observation on this, Edwin, is that if you are looking at a particular block and looking at a particular apartment within a block, it's also worth just doing a quick search on how many other apartments in the block are for sale and for rent. It's quite interesting that people quite often don't actually go through that process, right? And it gives you quite a good feel for what people are asking for rent. And if you've got lots and lots and lots of apartments in the same building, all for sale and all vacant, that tells you something about the rentability of it, right? And it might be good to walk away rather than commit.
Yeah, look, and on that, as I said, there are a lot of agencies that are able to that have done deals with their investor groups, and they've put a lot of investors in certain blocks, and they control most of the sales and most of the rentals in a lot of these blocks. So not only do they do what you suggested, Martin, but also do a drive by early in the evening when the lights generally come on, and see how many apartments actually have lights that are on. You get a general feel of what's going on as well when you do those sort of drive-bys to see how many are really occupied. Because if the agents are drip feeding the market with for sale listings or rentals, as I said, you're not really going to get a full picture. But you start to, it's not just about doing one thing, but as you're saying, it's about doing multiple things in order to make a better assessment of the investment that you're going to make in that particular complex.
Yeah, absolutely. It's doing the work. And I have to tell you a little story. I was a few years ago walking around Docklands, mid-evening. It wasn't very late, but it was fascinating to see how many buildings were just pretty much black. Right, they had lights on the ground floor, and there's a couple of lights upstairs, but they were, mostly vacant. And I was talking to a couple of local agents at the time, and they said, "Well, unfortunately, there's almost nobody living there." Right, it's a really, really good indication. In fact, you mentioned Cashmore. She actually made the point some time ago. You can also look at the water usage, right, and the water usage is way lower than it should be, which is another indicator of vacant properties by the yard.
Yeah, exactly. And look, they were able to circumvent the electricity bills by putting in timers on the switches. But you can't really circumvent the water usage, as you do the electricity bills. Another way to get a really good idea of what's happening with a lot of these residential towers and high rises. Most of them are mixed use developments, Martin. So go there and ask the shops underneath, the owners of the shops, because they'll get the general traffic throughout the day or the evenings and weekends as well, and they'll have a very good idea as to how well visited or how well occupied or vacant the complex is, because they're the ones that are relying on that foot traffic to sell their goods.
Yeah, very good advice there. Well, once again, we've done a big tour of apartments tonight. I think there are some really, really really important tips there for people. But the bottom line is this: do the work, do the research. Don't take top level information as being true. Test it for yourself, because you can, sometimes get caught up, and then you have to repent at your leisure, and quite often you'll lose an mozza in the process.
Yeah, that's right. And so look, and then if all that fails, just get on your knees and pray, Martin. How's that?
Yeah, to St. Edwin, of course.
Yeah.
Very good, Edwin. Thanks for your time tonight. Once again, always great.
Always a pleasure, Martin. And looking forward to next week.
Yeah, we'll see you then. Take care.
Okay. Cheers.